Hello and welcome to another episode of Wide Open Throttle. With me today, the usual Motor Trend crew, and we'll get right into it with the Bmw M3, one of the great icon cars of all time. And Carlos, you've had your share of iconography this past week.
It was an awesome experience driving all those four cars back to back on a closed course with basically no rules.
So you're talking about
E30, E36, E46, E92 M3. And the crazy thing was the E36 was a special edition, a lightweight. There's, I think, around 100 or 120 in the US. And this one had not that many miles on it. We were basically given full access to it. It was an amazing experience.
So who else has driven? How many other M3?
Several recently, actually. I did recent head-to-head. Greg Emerson from European Car and drove kind of a high mile, a little bit beat up E30 M3. And then a couple months before that, I got to drive several M3s at the Nürburgring, which was pretty amazing.
So, and I'm old enough to have driven the E30 when it was new in Germany and everyone since. So the thing that enthusiasts always get into fistfights over is which is the best M3 of them all. So Carlos?
It's a tough answer because they all have their strengths. And I used to own an E36, so I'm biased in that way, but that wouldn't actually be my choice. I think of the four, the E46 is the sweet spot because it costs, a decent used version will cost less than a good E30. It's a lot faster, it's just as fun, and you don't have to worry about hurting it as much as you would in an E30. E30 is a great car, very, very good car, but they're crazy expensive to find a clean one. And every time you drive it, you'd be thinking, this thing's gonna be worth a lot of money one day. I don't know if I want to put that many more miles on it.
I'm sensing Mr. Feber might disagree with you.
Yeah, he has some very good arguments, but he's still wrong. The E30 is the car to have. If the genie pops out of the bottle and says you can have one M3, you have to go with the E30. It's the original. When you see him on the street, it's like looking at a race car. The flares, the extended deck lid on the back.
Yeah, it's a very special car. Like it couldn't be built today.
The M3 has got bigger and fatter and heavier, but I don't know that it's got any worse.
I don't think it has. As I drove those cars, we did it chronologically, going through the generations, and I never got to a car and was like, yeah, they made a bad decision here. It was never that. It was, this car is faster and it behaves slightly differently, but it still has, there are still some core behaviors that translate through all those cars. And I think the most crucial one is just sheer controllability. Every single one of those cars, you throw that car into a corner, you know exactly what it's going to do. It never surprises you. It never bites you.
I always love the noise of the six-cylinder car.
But it's interesting you mentioned the cars getting bigger and heavier because from what we understand, BMW has decided now that that's a key focus for whatever the next M3, M4, since what that's they're going to call a coupe version will be. They've taken a big focus on weight, and it's not about making a more powerful car anymore, but making a lighter car that's more responsive and more fun to drive.
I think the two key issues that I'm going to be watching for the next generation car will be steering feel, because I think BMW's steering feel has lost its way a bit. It's not as pure as it used to be. And throttle response, because they're going to a turbocharged engine. And one of the things that to me always defined an M car, M3, was the crispness of the throttle response.
I think the most difficult thing that they're going to have to accomplish is make that turbocharged six-cylinder feel like a naturally aspirated engine. You know, the modern M cars, the M5 and the M6, they have just amazing torque. And as soon as you get to, 2,000 RPM, it's, oh my God, this thing is fast. That's not what an M car is to me. An M car to me is like defined in the last 2,000 RPM of its rev range.
Which German cars always used to be, because on the autobahns they were always, you needed cars that rev. I've driven the M1 supercar, the original M1, the E28 M5. I remember driving them on the Autobahn. It was all when you got up to around 6,000 RPM, that's when the fun really happened. I mean, the idea of a Torquemeister M car kind of still seems weird to me.
The four-cylinder engine now, the turbo four-cylinder, it's in the 3 Series and the 5 Series and the Z4 and everything else. It seems to lose a bit of that.
Yeah, they're using small turbos just so they can get that torque at the low end.
And in fauress, torque is much better for daily driving than anything else.
Definitely.
But that E30 M3, it gets better the harder you thrash it.
Oh yeah.
Okay, so quick poll. You can take one of those four cars home. Which one would you take home, Alison? E30.
I'm gonna say E30.
E30.
I'm gonna stick with E46.
I'm kind of with Carlos, actually. That was like the car to have.
Yeah, I'd probably go with you because I like the 6-cylinder cars. E46 wins over E30. Let the hate mail begin right now. Okay, we're going to shift gears a little bit and move on to something completely different. With the new Range Rover and the Mercedes-Benz G63. Now talk about two extremes. The G63 hasn't changed since Fred Flintstone got his learner's permit. And the Range Rover is the state of the art in modern SUVs.
You've got the G63 with locking differentials and big solid axles and things that would really slow truck-like steering that, you know, you're just cranking around. And it got there and it did everything just fine. And then you got the Range Rover that's got, you know, 37,000 settings and computers and everything else that was really quick steering, very nimble, and you just kind of hopped over things. Radically different approaches.
I mean, the G is Mercedes-Benz's Porsche 911, isn't it? It's the vehicle they can't kill because, you know, it started out as a military vehicle. It was a German version of a Jeep, and people just love them.
Because you see them rolling around. I mean, we were sitting in Beverly Hills at, you know, a coffee shop between takes of filming, and we just started counting, you know, all the Range Rovers and G-Wagons we saw driving by, and they're everywhere. And the amazing thing is, most people wouldn't consider this a luxury car if you just said, you know, which one's the, you know, the more posh, you know, thing those celebrities would drive. But it's got this image that you just have to have it.
Love it. I mean, full of character. But I've also just spent a weekend in Range Rovers supercharged and the naturally aspirated, and I've got to say, I don't think I've driven a better SUV. I mean, it is just remarkably smooth and quiet and refined. You can pull up to the country club with all the Bentleys and Benzes, or you can go anywhere in the world. Makes you wonder how much money they're making off the G. They amortized the tooling on that a long time.
It has to be incredibly profitable. The tooling has been paid for years, decades even.
You know, the center stack is the same HVAC controls and things you get in everything. It's the same cluster and, you know, gauges you get in any AMG there. I mean, they're not designing that much. Anything new that's going in that truck is probably shared with something else.
So where did we end up in the comparison? Range Rover or G-Wagon? You know, the state of the art versus Fred Flintstone's ride.
The Range Rover is objectively a kind of a better vehicle at everything. It's more luxurious and it's, you know, faster and it's more comfortable and quieter. And you can't go wrong with either of them, but you want to drive the G so much because it's just, there's something about it.
So, you know, rationality and objectivity's completely gone out the window.
It's an SUV with twin turbos and side pipes. I mean, what do you want?
Well, it's a tough business, the car business, and when you think about the number of car companies that have gone out of business recently, it doesn't seem to be getting any easier. So in the past few weeks, we've seen Fisker in trouble, Coda go out of business, and even Carbon Motors, who are trying to do a bespoke police car, all run into financial trouble. I mean, it's an old saying, isn't it? If you, how do you make a small fortune in the car industry? Well, you know, you start with a big one. What's going on here? Why is it so difficult?
I think it shows the complexity of creating a car company, that you not only have to be really good at what you're doing, you also need a small line of miracles to happen in order for things to actually work out. And I think the only car company that we've seen pull through in recent years is Tesla, and even then they're still shaky too.
The jury's still out on long term on Tesla.
Well, and complexity means money. I mean, the sheer number of things, from parts to factories to engineers and research and development, and cars that you have to crash, you know, test that's just going to be written off. I mean, it's a huge investment. I mean, we just lost Suzuki as well in the United States, and that's a multinational company that couldn't, you know, keep it together in the States, and Mitsubishi's looking a little shaky too.
I think Suzuki and maybe Mitsubishi, that's a completely different maybe problem than what the startups have. That's kind of a series of bad decisions that have all kind of compounded to lead to their demise. But when you're looking at a new car company, a startup, I don't think people realize how much work goes into a car. And if you're starting up a car company, you can go out and poach engineers and designers from other car companies, but I don't think you're still not going to have that basis that all these car companies that have been around for 100 years have to draw on.
Well, that's something a lot of people are finding out. The Chinese automakers, for example, I mean, I remember years and years ago, in my hometown, somebody tried to open up a Chery dealership. They were sure that Chinese cars were coming any day, and they've built cars, but none of them has achieved success abroad or even at home, I think.
And if you look at the top 10 best-selling cars in China last year, not one of them was a Chinese branded car. So not even the Chinese consumers are buying Chinese branded cars, even though the Chinese government has mandated that if you want to sell cars or you want to make cars in China, you have to have a joint venture with a Chinese automaker.
I mean, that's the difficulty, as Mike mentioned, in the US, Ford, Chevy, Chrysler have been around for a very long time. But buying a new car from a new automaker takes a certain amount of faith. And I'm wondering right now what's happening to all the Fisker owners now that that company's in trouble.
Saab owners.
That too.
I mean, it's hard enough just to launch a new brand. I mean, everyone's been asking, Hyundai, why didn't you make Genesis its own brand? I mean, just marketing and creating a new brand out of nowhere that has no equity in it, no history to pull from anything else, and tell people you should spend 30, 40, 50, how many $1,000s on this vehicle from a brand nobody's ever heard of. That's a tough sell.
Cars were the dot-coms of the early 1900s, and now the barrier to entry is so big that
Even just brands that have come out of nowhere. I mean, Lexus is arguably the most successful of the brands that were just kind of made up in the 1980s there. Infiniti is still trying to figure out who they are, and Acura was never quite as successful as Lexus. And I mean, the only one of the even more recent startups since then is Tesla. Nobody's certain that they're going to last forever either.
Well, but interestingly enough, if there's only one US automaker in the top 5 now in terms of global sales volume, and that's General Motors. Ford is number 6 and Hyundai Kia is ahead of it. So the world's changing pretty quickly, and I don't know whether we're going to see any new startups in the next few years. It's a pretty tough game to get into. But that's all for this week, so until next week, goodbye.